We're going to sing. They're going to lead us in Amazing Grace. So everybody stand up. The words are in your bulletin. We're going to sing just the first two verses, and then you're going to get a chance to sing the last two at the end of the service.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed.
Amen. Let's see, where's my son? Come on up, Gabes. For you don't know, this is my oldest son, Gabriel. I have 4 boys. Gabriel, Noah. Where's Jonah? He's here? No, he's heaven, yeah. Jonah and Elijah. So I have 4 boys. And all of them have been called into different things in their life. My youngest, if you're here last night, you probably heard him sing and do music. Jonah has been called into, I always say that he's selling top secret things to the government, but that's not what he's doing. But he has a calling in his life. My son Noah's here, and Noah, he works at a ball field, and God's called him to minister to, I think, to ball players and to people in that field. And then Gabriel's been called into ministry. He's doing an internship at his church, and I had Gabriel preach in my old church at least a dozen times, I think, when I was 12 years, maybe once a year, I'm not sure. But one time we did a one sermon together. And I called it a conversational sermon. And we said, right, everybody could just listen in as we talk back and forth. Do you have a mic, Gibbs? You want to grab one? You might. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk a little bit about God's grace, and especially the story of Amazing Grace. And so I don't know if you know the story behind Amazing Grace. It's a story of John Newton, who experienced God's redemption, and I think Junia wants to also preach someday, experienced God's redemption in his grace. John Newton was born in 1725 in London. He had a very devout Christian mother who taught him a lot of things about the Lord, but his mother died when he was 7 years old. And then he was under the care of his father, who was a sea captain. And his life then, as he got older, was marked with a lot of rebellion and a lot of, or a lack of moral direction. He didn't know what direction he was going in life. He had no, inkling for God at all. And because his dad was a sea captain, he joined that area of being a sea captain, but he was a slave trader, so he would pick up slaves as a young man, and he was the captain of a slave ship. And then it was out during one of those times that a storm, we talked about this morning about a storm in our lives, a storm changed everything for him. He was on a ship, a terrible storm came in the Atlantic. He didn't know if it was going to go under or not, and it was there that Newton cried out to God for mercy and for grace in the middle of a storm. And he ended up leaving the slave trade, and he became a minister of the gospel. And in 1772, as he was writing one of his sermons, he was looking for an illustration that would go with his sermon, and that's where he wrote the song. Amazing Grace, to talk about his experience of redemption, transformation, and God's grace. And I know we've all experienced, hopefully you have, God's grace in your life and redemption. And so, Gabriel, take the first stanza. He's going to share a little bit more about God's grace.
Sure. One of the things that I think is helpful and really great about the first verse of Amazing Grace is that it does a fantastic job of defining what we mean when we talk about God's grace. I think grace is a word that's easy for Christians to throw around because it's part of our natural vocabulary, but not often defined. And as I read the first verse of Amazing Grace, it strikes me that it echoes a passage from Ephesians chapter 2 fairly strongly. So what I'd like to do just briefly is read a few verses here from Ephesians chapter 2, beginning in verse 1 and through verse 9. The Apostle Paul says, "And you he made alive when you were dead through trespasses and sins, in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. Among these we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, following the desires of body and mind, and so we were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. But God," verse 4, "who is rich in mercy, out of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead through our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised up with him, and made us sit with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness toward us in Christ Jesus. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not because of works, lest any man should boast." And I think what's fascinating in the first verse of Amazing Grace is that it echoes the sentiment in this text, much of which we actually heard during the baptismal testimony, being dead in trespasses and sins, made alive by Christ. I think it's interesting that in this first verse, the only thing that man contributes to his salvation is his own wretchedness, his own being lost, his own blindness. That's the only contribution that fallen man makes. And it's God who is active, saving and rescuing man, so that there's no room to boast.
Yeah, we have nothing. I mean, we have ourselves we offer to God, but we come right as we are.
Yeah.
And for John Newton, he was a slave trader, and I think about his life, Gabe. He had lost his mother at a young age, and then probably lost his ways, following in his footsteps of his dad. And we heard, if you were here last night, Randy shared a little bit about his experience of missing a father and a dad figure in his life, and his life turned to being wretchedness and being blind, and God's grace, right, is what found him. You know, I think in verse 2 it says, "It 'twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and fears in my grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed." You know, as I think about that, I think that grace part, he began to move from guilt, right, to peace through God's love. And if I think about it in all our lives, and I think about my own lives, there is sometimes guilt. You know, we don't do how we're supposed to live, and we need God's grace and peace and love in our lives. Even if we think we're on the right direction, God is waiting there for us. And I think that's what happened to John Newton. You know, he finally realized he didn't need to fear. You know, and there's probably a lot of fear in your lives. I don't know, but you have, I know your new family. Gabriel's expecting a second child, a daughter, Sarah, in December. So there's a little fear, I think, in that. But
Certainly.
we all have some kind of fears in our life, and God can relieve that fear through his grace.
Yeah, what strikes me about verse 2 is that it's also an exchange of fears. Grace taught his heart to fear, which I think we should understand as fear of the Lord, and grace relieved his fears.
Yes.
Relieved inappropriate fears and instilled an appropriate fear of God.
Yes.
In
So
humility.
it's exchanged it back.
Verse 3 we haven't read yet, but I'll read it for us. Through many dangers, toils, and snares I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. And so for John Newton, it's not only grace that saves him, but it's grace that carries him through his Christian life. The same grace that saved him. So grace for the Christian is not simply a past tense experience. It's not something that we experienced when we were first saved and that we grow out of or move on from, but it's that same grace of God that takes the nothing that we have to offer in our fallen state and both brings us to salvation and then carries us the rest of the way through till the end.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, sometimes in my life I've had experiences where I've always needed God's grace, but where I've hit rock bottom and have had to call it to God and experience His grace in my own life. You know, verse 4, I love it. When we've been there, think 10,000 years. How many of you want to live 10,000 years? We're talking about heaven, though, right? None of us want to. I don't know what I'll be looking like in 10,000 years, but this is when we've been there 10,000 years, we're talking about heaven, bright shining as the sun. We've no less days. Listen, this is what we're going to be doing, right, in heaven. Singing God's praise than we first began. Singing God's praise. Singing God's praise of His grace that He has offered to us. And I think in my own life, I talked about God's grace that's been offered to me. I experienced that 16 years ago when I went through my divorce. But I just didn't experience, I wanted to bring this up because my family's here. I just didn't experience God's grace, especially through God. And I'll tell you, it was amazing when He did offer me grace. I experienced God's grace through my family. My brother and his wife didn't have to, but they took me in for 2 years as I healed in my life in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I experienced God's grace from them. And I had many conversations with my sister and her family, and I experienced God's grace and love from them and from my dad. And even though my boys were very young, I think Gabriel was 12 years old at the time, and my youngest was 2.5, I experienced grace from my kids. Do you know that your kids can offer you grace and forgiveness? And I experienced that in my life through my boys. And that is such an amazing experience. So when it says we've been there 10,000 years, and it says we've no less days than what? Sing God's praise. And so I hope you have something to sing about in your life, about God's grace and God's praise in your life. Randy, come up here for a sec. Randy's one of my favorite cousins because he kind of looks like me.
And not his only one.
And Randy last night, if you weren't there, he's not going to share his whole testimony, but I've asked him to share about how he has seen God's grace in his life.
Yeah, just listening to Mark share his story about grace in his life reminds me that we all have a testimony. Every one of us in this room have a testimony of God's grace and what He's done in our life. I've experienced His grace in such amazing supernatural ways. I was a runaway kid. Some of you heard my story last night, running away from God, trying to fulfill the hole in my life with everything that life had to offer. I was a fatherless child. I was an orphan kid, basically running scared, had a lot of fear, and I experienced God's grace in 1988 when Jesus Christ came into my life and started washing me clean of all the guilt and shame and condemnation that I had faced in life, that I had chose to run after, to pursue the things of the world that didn't fulfill. But God's grace was always there. The Father was always pursuing me with His grace and His love. And in 1988, when I asked Jesus Christ to come into my life, He set me free from things that I couldn't do on my own. I tried many times to quit the alcohol, the drugs, everything that I filled my life with. But it was His grace that came in and said, Randy, I'm going to show you how real I am by taking those things out of your life. And And when he saved me and set me free from the addiction of cocaine and marijuana and cigarettes and alcohol, it was so supernatural to me. I didn't understand it at the time. But his grace came in and pulled those things out of my life to where I had no desire for them anymore. Only God can do that. We can't do that under our own power, our own strength. It's him and him alone and his grace that came into my life and set me free. And I'll just finish with this. It's not always an easy road to follow Christ. There's going to be challenges along the way. There's going to be things that we have to go through. But it's a key word is trust. It's trusting him regardless of what life may throw at us. And when you trust him, his grace comes in and strengthens you and empowers you to be overcomers, to be victors, to be winners, to be the head, not the tail. His grace is sufficient. His grace is powerful. His grace is more than we could ever think or imagine. He's so good. God is so good. And I'm so thankful for his grace. I'm thankful for Mark, for his heart to serve. Because that's what we do as any kind of ministry. We're here to serve. We're here to lift up. We're here to encourage. And it's only through God's grace that we can stand. It's only his grace that I'm here today. Honestly, if I look back over the years, there's no reason logically that I should be alive or here today. It's only his grace that I'm here today sharing with you guys. And it's an honor. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Mark.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here and sharing with us. Thank you, Gabe, for sharing and stuff. I'm going to ask Cindy and the group. They're going to lead us in the last two verses of Amazing Grace as we end our time this morning.
Feel free to stand.
Yes, together.
It's too bad it didn't have some words about thunder, but it's okay. Through many dangers. Through many dangers, toils and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise.